The greatest tennis player in the world was about to lose the most important match of her life. Not on a court, but in a hospital room. Not against an opponent, but against doctors who wouldn't listen. The score was life or death, and only she knew how to win. Welcome to the story Gook. Before we dive into this story of medical heroism, maternal intuition, and the fight to be heard when your life depends on it, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that sometimes we must be our own advocates to survive, hit that subscribe button and help us share stories of champions who fight battles no one sees. This is the story of September 1st, 2017, the day Serena Williams won the most important match of her career, not with a tennis racket, but with her voice. Serena Williams had spent 22 years learning to read the signals her body sent her. Every muscle, every sensation, every subtle change in rhythm or breathing. Her survival as a professional athlete depended on understanding what her body was telling her. She knew the difference between fatigue and exhaustion, between discomfort and pain, between something being wrong and something being dangerous. On September 1st, 2017, as she went into labor with her daughter Olympia, that knowledge would become the most important skill she had ever developed. The pregnancy had been challenging. At 35, Serena was considered a high-risk mother. She had a history of blood clots, a condition that made pregnancy potentially life-threatening. Her medical team was aware of this history. They knew she had experienced pulmonary embolisms before, blood clots that travel to the lungs and can kill within minutes. But despite this knowledge, despite her history, despite her status as one of the most famous women in the world, what happened next would reveal dangerous gaps in how medical professionals listen to their patients. Especially women. Especially Black women. Especially when those women try to advocate for themselves. The labor was difficult, but not unusual. After nearly 20 hours, Olympia was born via emergency C-section. For a brief moment, everything seemed perfect. Serena held her daughter, exhausted but elated. She had done it. At 35, she had brought new life into the world, while being one of the greatest athletes of all time. But within hours of Olympia's birth, Serena began to feel something that made her blood run cold. She recognized the sensation immediately, though she prayed she was wrong. Shortness of breath, a tight, crushing feeling in her chest, the unmistakable symptoms of a pulmonary embolism, the same condition that had nearly killed her years before. She knew what this was. She knew how dangerous it was, and she knew she needed help immediately. But when she tried to tell the medical staff what was happening, they didn't listen. "I need a CT scan with contrast, and I need it now," Serena told the nurses. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a suggestion from someone who had watched too many medical shows. This was a specific, medically accurate demand from a woman who knew exactly what was happening to her body and exactly what test would save her life. The response she received would haunt her for years to come. "What?" the nurse replied, as if Serena had spoken in a foreign language. Serena tried again, fighting through the growing pressure in her chest. "I'm having trouble breathing. I have a history of blood clots. I need a CT scan with contrast to check for a pulmonary embolism." The medical staff exchanged glances. Here was a woman who had just undergone major surgery, who was on pain medication, who had just given birth, telling them how to do their jobs. To them, she wasn't a champion athlete with an intimate knowledge of her own body. She was just another patient experiencing normal post-surgical anxiety. "Mrs. Williams," a doctor said in the patronizing tone that women in hospitals know all too well, "you just had a baby. It's normal to feel short of breath. You're probably just having some anxiety about becoming a new mother." Anxiety. The word hit Serena like a physical blow. She had just accurately diagnosed herself with a potentially fatal condition, requested the exact test needed to confirm it, and they were attributing her symptoms to anxiety. But Serena Williams hadn't become the greatest tennis player of all time by accepting answers she knew were wrong. On the court, when a line judge made a bad call, she fought. When an opponent tried to intimidate her, she fought back harder. And now, when her life was on the line, she fought like she had never fought before. "I'm not anxious," she said, her voice growing stronger despite her breathing difficulties. "I know my body. I've had pulmonary embolisms before. I need that CT scan now." The medical team reluctantly agreed to an ultrasound of her legs to check for clots. It came back negative. "See," they seemed to say, "no clots, just anxiety." But Serena knew they were looking in the wrong place. Blood clots don't always start in the legs. Sometimes they form directly in the lungs. Sometimes they migrate from other parts of the body. And sometimes they're invisible to tests that aren't designed to find them. She demanded the CT scan again. This time, the frustration in the medical staff's voices was barely concealed. Finally, after hours of Serena insisting that something was wrong, they agreed to the scan she had been requesting. Not because they believed her, but perhaps because it was easier than continuing to argue with a world-famous athlete who refused to be quiet. The results came back within minutes. Multiple blood clots in her lungs, massive pulmonary embolism, life-threatening. If she had waited much longer, if she had accepted their initial dismissal, if she had trusted their assessment over her own knowledge of her body, she would have died. The CT scan results changed everything. Suddenly, the calm hospital room erupted into controlled chaos. Nurses rushed in with emergency medications. Doctors who had been dismissive minutes before were now intensely focused on keeping her alive. But for Serena, this was just the beginning of a medical nightmare that would last days. The blood thinners they gave her to treat the clots caused her C-section wound to bleed internally. Blood pooled in her abdomen, creating a hematoma the size of a grapefruit. The pressure was excruciating, but when she complained of pain, she was initially told it was normal post-surgical discomfort. Once again, she had to fight to be heard. Once again, she had to advocate for herself when the medical establishment tried to minimize her symptoms. "This isn't normal pain," she insisted. "Something is wrong." Another scan, another confirmation that she was right and they were wrong. Emergency surgery to stop the internal bleeding. But even that wasn't the end. The blood thinners that saved her from the clots made surgery dangerous. The surgery that stopped the bleeding put her at risk for more clots. It was a medical catch-22 that required constant monitoring and adjustment. For days, Serena lay in that hospital bed, fighting not just for her health, but for her voice to be heard. Every symptom she reported was initially dismissed. Every concern she raised was attributed to anxiety, pain medication, or new mother nerves. Each time, she had to fight to get the care she needed. Each time, she had to prove that she knew her own body better than the medical professionals who were supposed to be caring for her. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was a woman who had spent her entire career being told she was too aggressive, too demanding, too much. Now, in a hospital bed, those same qualities were literally keeping her alive. If she had been quiet, if she had been the good patient who didn't question medical authority, if she had accepted their initial assessments, she would have died. Her newborn daughter would have grown up without a mother. The tennis world would have lost its greatest champion to a preventable death. During those terrifying days in the hospital, as Serena fought one medical emergency after another, she began to understand something that would change her perspective forever. This wasn't just about her survival. It was about a systemic problem that was killing women, particularly Black women, at alarming rates. The statistics are devastating. Black women in the United States are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women. They are more likely to have their pain dismissed, their symptoms minimized, their medical knowledge questioned. Serena Williams, with all her fame, all her resources, all her access to the best medical care money could buy, had nearly become another statistic. If it could happen to her, what was happening to women who didn't have her platform, her resources, her ability to demand the care they needed? But in that hospital room, fighting for her life while her newborn daughter lay in the nursery, Serena made a decision that would save countless other lives. She would not be silent about what had happened to her. She would use her voice, her platform, her story to ensure that other women wouldn't face the same dismissal she had experienced. The medical team that had initially dismissed her began to listen not just to her symptoms, but to her insights about her care. They adjusted medications based on her feedback. They took her pain reports seriously. They began to treat her not as a difficult patient, but as a partner in her own health care. Slowly, over the course of a week, the bleeding stopped, the clots dissolved, the immediate danger passed, but the experience had changed her forever. When she was finally stable enough to hold Olympia for extended periods, when she could finally begin to process what had happened, Serena realized that her ability to advocate for herself hadn't just saved her life. It had preserved her daughter's future. Every time she had refused to accept anxiety as an explanation for her symptoms, she had been fighting for Olympia's right to have a mother. Every time she had demanded the care she knew she needed, she had been ensuring that her daughter wouldn't grow up without the woman who had fought so hard to bring her into the world. Serena's near-death experience could have remained a private medical trauma, shared only with family and close friends. Many celebrities who face health crises choose to keep their stories quiet, to maintain their privacy and avoid the scrutiny that comes with public vulnerability. But Serena Williams made a different choice. She decided to speak out, knowing that her story could save other women's lives. In interviews and public appearances, she began sharing the details of her medical emergency. Not the sanitized version that many public figures offer, but the raw, frightening truth of what it felt like to be dismissed by medical professionals when her life was on the line. "I literally had to fight for my life," she said in one interview. "I know that doesn't make for a nice story, but it's the truth. And if I hadn't been willing to fight, I wouldn't be here." Her willingness to speak about medical bias, about the specific ways that Black women are dismissed in healthcare settings, about the life-saving importance of self-advocacy, began to change conversations in hospitals across the country. Medical schools began incorporating her story into their curricula, using it to teach future doctors about the importance of listening to patients, particularly women and minorities who have historically been dismissed in medical settings. Hospitals began reviewing their protocols for treating post-surgical complications, particularly in new mothers. The specific tests that Serena had to fight to receive began to be offered more readily to women presenting with similar symptoms. But perhaps most importantly, women around the world began to understand that they had the right to advocate for themselves in medical settings. They learned that questioning medical authority wasn't being difficult. It was being responsible for their own health. Serena's story gave them permission to be persistent, to trust their instincts, to demand the care they needed, even when medical professionals suggested they were overreacting. The impact of Serena's willingness to share her story extended far beyond individual patient interactions. It sparked institutional changes that continue to save lives today. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists began developing new guidelines for postpartum care, with specific attention to the symptoms and risk factors that Serena had experienced. Her case became a teaching tool for recognizing and treating postpartum complications. Medical research into racial disparities in healthcare received increased funding and attention. Studies that had been documenting these disparities for years suddenly found their work in the spotlight, their findings impossible to ignore. The tennis world, too, began to understand their champion in a new way. Here was a woman who had won 23 Grand Slams, who had dominated her sport for 2 decades, but whose greatest victory might have been the one no one saw: the fight to stay alive in a hospital room. When Serena returned to professional tennis 10 months after Olympia's birth, she wasn't just attempting a comeback. She was proving that the same voice that had saved her life could still command courts and audiences around the world. Every match she played was a testament to the power of self-advocacy. Every interview she gave was an opportunity to remind women that they knew their bodies better than anyone else. Every public appearance was a chance to encourage others to speak up when something felt wrong. The woman who had once been criticized for being too vocal, too demanding, too assertive, had proven that those exact qualities could mean the difference between life and death. Her medical emergency had taught her, and the world, that sometimes being difficult is being heroic. Sometimes questioning authority is life-saving. Sometimes the most important match you'll ever play isn't on a tennis court, but in a hospital room, fighting for the right to be heard. Today, when women enter hospitals for childbirth or any other medical care, many of them carry Serena Williams' story with them. They know that if the greatest tennis player in the world had to fight to be heard, they might have to fight too. And that's okay, because fighting for your health isn't being difficult, it's being smart. The medical emergency that nearly took Serena's life became a catalyst for change that has saved countless other lives. Her willingness to speak about what happened, to share the frightening details of being dismissed and having to advocate for herself, transformed a personal trauma into a public health movement. Every woman who now insists on the medical test she knows she needs, every patient who refuses to accept anxiety as an explanation for serious symptoms, every person who trusts their own knowledge of their body over dismissive medical opinions. They're all following the path that Serena Williams carved out in that hospital room. She didn't just save her own life that day, she saved her daughter's future. And through her willingness to share her story, she's been saving other women's lives ever since. The greatest match Serena Williams ever won wasn't at Wimbledon or the US Open. It was in a hospital room, against doctors who wouldn't listen, fighting for the right to stay alive for her daughter. The score was life or death, and she won. So now I ask you, have you ever had to advocate for yourself in a medical setting? Have you ever felt dismissed when you knew something was wrong? Share your story in the comments and let us know what city you're watching from. Thank you for watching the story Gook. If this story of medical heroism, maternal intuition, and the life-saving power of speaking up inspired you, subscribe for more stories of champions who fight battles no one sees but everyone can learn from. We'll see you in the next story, and until then, remember, sometimes the most important match you'll ever play is the one where you fight for your right to be heard.